He had everything money could buy: cars, mansions, power. But on a quiet evening at a simple gas station, all that status vanished with a single beep. His car was declined. People watched. Some smirked, others whispered. But what happened next wasn't about wealth at all. Two young black kids, unnoticed by most, stepped forward in a way no one expected. Their choice would turn humiliation into something far greater, something unforgettable. But why would children act when grown adults looked away? It was supposed to be just another ordinary stop. The billionaire, a man known for his spotless suits and polished image, pulled into a small gas station on the edge of town. For someone who lived in luxury, this place was a world apart. Fluorescent lights buzzing, cracked pavement underfoot, and strangers moving quietly through the night. He had been here before, but never really seen it. To him, it was just a quick detour, another errand in a life that rarely slowed down. People knew his face, his name, his fortune. He had made headlines for success, for power, for being untouchable. Yet behind that aura of wealth was a man who believed money could solve anything. Few ever dared to challenge him, and fewer still imagined him vulnerable. But that night, vulnerability arrived in the most unexpected way. As he reached for his card, sliding it into the machine with the same careless confidence as always, he didn't think twice. Why would he? For him, transactions were routine, seamless, unquestioned. But this time, something didn't add up. The beep that followed wasn't approval. It was rejection. The screen flashed words he hadn't seen in decades. Declined. At first, he laughed it off, assuming it was just a machine error. But then he tried again. And again. Each failed attempt chipped away at the certainty he carried like armor. People began to notice. A cashier glanced over. A stranger pumping gas smirked. Whispers traveled faster than the night breeze. The man who had everything now looked like he had nothing. And yet, the most important eyes in that moment weren't those of the bystanders. A few feet away, two young black kids watched quietly, unnoticed by the crowd. They saw something others didn't. While everyone else stood back, entertained by the fall of the powerful man, these children felt something different. Something that would soon turn a simple decline into a story no one could forget. The billionaire stood frozen, his confidence slipping with every failed attempt. Each time the card reader beeped and flash declined, it echoed louder than the hum of the gas pumps. His tailored jacket suddenly felt heavy, as though the weight of all those watching eyes pressed down on his shoulders. For years, he had built his life on control, controlling his image, his business, his empire. But now, here he was, stripped of that power by something as small as a plastic card. The murmurs around him grew. A teenager snickered. A woman shook her head in disbelief. The cashier, once polite, now looked impatient, as though this man were just another problem to deal with. He wanted to explain, to insist that there must have been some error, but he stopped himself. Any excuse would only make things worse. People weren't seeing him as the billionaire anymore. They were seeing him as a man defeated by the same system he had always believed worked only in his favor. And then came the part he hadn't expected. The shift from mockery to something darker. A man leaning against his truck muttered loudly enough for others to hear. Figures. Rich man, but can't even pay for gas. His tone wasn't just mocking. It dripped with satisfaction, as if watching the wealthy stumble brought him joy. Others joined in, small laughs, shaking heads. The crowd didn't need to know his name. They only needed to see his humiliation to feel entertained. But underneath it all, something more insidious began to stir. Two police officers who had been parked near the convenience store stepped out of their car. Their eyes scanned the scene, lingering on the billionaire, then shifting toward the two kids who had been watching quietly. The children, no older than 10 or 11, stood close together, holding worn backpacks, their clothes faded and shoes scuffed from long use. The officers didn't look at them with kindness. Instead, suspicion clouded their faces. One of the officers gestured toward the kids, whispering to the other, it didn't matter that they were just bystanders. In that moment, the narrative was already being twisted. The billionaire's struggle with his card was embarrassing, yes, but the officer seemed more concerned with the presence of two young black children near the pumps. The billionaire caught their glance and, for the first time in years, felt powerless to stop what might come next. He wasn't the center of attention anymore. The kids were. The officers approached slowly, their footsteps deliberate. People noticed, and the mood shifted. The laughter faded. The crowd's smirks turned into something quieter. Curiosity, maybe even anticipation. "Where are your parents?" one officer demanded, his tone sharp, as though the children had done something wrong simply by existing there. The kids looked at each other, uncertain. They hadn't spoken, hadn't interfered, but now they were the target. The billionaire wanted to say something, to intervene, but hesitation rooted him in place. He thought about his own image, his own embarrassment, and for a moment, he stayed silent. That silence burned, because what followed next was the cruel turn of the night. The cashier stepped outside, pointing at the kids. "They've been hanging around here all week," she said, "probably looking for trouble." It wasn't true. They had been waiting for their mother, who worked late shifts cleaning offices nearby. But truth didn't matter. In a society that judged them by skin color before action, they were already guilty in the eyes of many. The officers moved closer. The older twin clutched his brother's hand, holding him tight, refusing to let go. Their eyes widened with fear, but they didn't cry. They stood there, trembling but unbroken, as if they'd faced moments like this before. And the billionaire, still standing by the pump, still humiliated, watched the injustice unfold. The attention had shifted away from him, but the sting in the air grew heavier, sharper. It wasn't just about his card anymore. This night had become about something far deeper. The children's gaze met his for just a second, and in that brief, silent exchange, he understood what he was really witnessing. His embarrassment was temporary, a story he could laugh off tomorrow. But for these kids, humiliation, suspicion, and danger weren't temporary. They were everyday realities, and that realization cut deeper than any beep of a card machine. The officers reached for the boys. The crowd, once entertained by the billionaire's fall, now stood in tense silence, watching the children become the new spectacle. That's when the younger twin did something no one expected. With trembling hands, he stepped forward, not away from the officers, but toward the billionaire. From his pocket, he pulled out a crumpled $5 bill, folded and worn from being saved for days. He held it out, his voice shaking but clear. "Here, sir, for your gas." The crowd gasped. The officers froze for a moment, caught off guard. And the billionaire, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Shame, but not for himself, for the world he had been blind to. That single act of generosity, from children who had nothing, shattered the humiliation he felt earlier. But it also magnified the cruelty of the scene. Because in that moment, the world saw clearly. Innocence offering help and authority ready to punish it. The night wasn't over. Tension hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. The billionaire's next move, and the response of those around him, would decide how this story ended. And the question lingered. Would he stay silent again? Or would this time be different? The $5 bill trembled in the boy's hand, the faded green edges fluttering in the night breeze. For a moment, the entire gas station went silent. The billionaire, who had built his empire on wealth, stood paralyzed by the sight of a child offering what little he had to help a man who already had everything. But before that act of kindness could even land, the officer stepped forward, breaking the fragile pause. "Put that away," one barked, his hand moving toward the older twin's shoulder. The command wasn't gentle. It carried the weight of authority, suspicion, and the quiet threat of force. The older brother tried to shield the younger one, tugging him back, but the officer grabbed his wrist. The boy winced, his small frame dwarfed by the uniformed man towering over him. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some pulled out phones, recording in shaky hands. Others looked away, uncomfortable, pretending not to see. The billionaire's heart pounded. He had seen boardrooms filled with ruthless men, had faced hostile takeovers, had survived financial storms. But nothing compared to this. A child, terrified, clinging to dignity while being treated like a criminal for simply existing. "Where'd you get that money?" the officer demanded, his voice sharp, accusatory. "Did you steal it?" The younger twin shook his head furiously. eyes wide with fear. "No! Sir, it's mine," he whispered. But his voice was drowned out by the officer's rising tone. And that was the breaking point. The billionaire stepped forward, his voice louder than he thought possible. "Enough." Heads turned. The crowd that had once mocked his embarrassment now froze in shock. The man they had ridiculed minutes earlier now stood taller, his face hardened not by pride, but by outrage. "Those boys did nothing wrong," he said, his voice steady, cutting through the tension. "They're not thieves. They're not criminals. They were trying to help me." The officer's grip tightened on the child's wrist. "Sir, step back. This doesn't concern you." But the billionaire didn't step back. He moved closer. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something raw, something human. "It does concern me, because I've stood silent too many times. Not this time." The younger twin still held out the crumpled bill, his small hand shaking violently. And in that moment, the billionaire took it, not as payment, but as a symbol. He raised it up for everyone to see. "This," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "is worth more than every card, every dollar, every empire I built, because it comes from a heart that gives, not from a system that takes." The crowd murmured. Phones captured every word, every gesture. The scene was no longer about a declined card. It was about truth laid bare, children facing injustice, and a powerful man finally using his voice. The officer, realizing the eyes of dozens, and soon the world, were on him, loosened his grip. The older twin stumbled back into his brother's arms, clutching him tight, refusing to let go. For the billionaire, it felt like time slowed. He saw the fear etched into their faces, the resilience burning in their eyes, and something inside him broke, not out of pity, but out of realization. His humiliation had lasted minutes. Theirs had lasted a lifetime. And as he stood there, surrounded by whispers, cameras, and flashing lights, he knew this wasn't just about one night at a gas station. It was about something much larger. A system where children could be treated as suspects before being seen as human. The billionaire looked at the officers, his voice lowering but sharper than ever. "You came here thinking they were the problem. But look around. They're the only ones who acted with decency tonight." Silence fell again, the kind that isn't empty, but heavy, charged with truth, anger, and the possibility of change. The boys clung to each other. The crowd waited. And the billionaire, once humiliated, now stood transformed. Because in that moment he realized the real decline wasn't on his card. It was on humanity. The billionaire stood there, holding the crumpled $5 bill, like it was a mirror reflecting everything he'd ignored for so long. The officers, faced with the weight of dozens of eyes and recording phones, finally stepped back. They muttered something about misunderstanding before retreating to their car, leaving the twins shaken but free. The crowd slowly dispersed, but not without whispers. Some people walked away in silence, unsettled by what they had witnessed. Others lingered, replaying the moment on their phones, knowing the world outside that gas station would soon see it too. But for the billionaire, the world already looked different. His humiliation had started with a card decline, but ended with something much greater, a confrontation with truth. For the first time, he had seen what it meant to be judged unfairly, not because of failure or wealth, but because of skin color, because of stereotypes that condemned before they listened. He looked at the boys, still holding on to each other tightly. They hadn't spoken much, but their silence said everything. They didn't cry. They didn't lash out. They simply endured, because that was what life had taught them to do. That endurance, that quiet strength, struck him harder than any business rival ever had. He knelt down, meeting them at eye level. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. Not for the money, not for the gesture, but for opening his eyes. The boys nodded, still wary, but in their gaze was something powerful, resilience, and a hope that maybe, just maybe, someone had finally listened. That night, the billionaire didn't drive away unchanged. The card issue could be fixed with a phone call. His embarrassment would fade in tomorrow's headlines. But the memory of those boys, targeted, suspected, yet still willing to give, would stay with him forever. And as he replayed the night in his mind, he realized something haunting. His worst humiliation had lasted only minutes. For them, this wasn't humiliation. It was survival. And survival wasn't temporary. It was daily. This story isn't just about a billionaire at a gas station. It isn't just about two boys offering kindness where the world gave them none. It's about the reality we live in, a world where innocence can be mistaken for guilt, where skin color becomes a verdict before a word is spoken. Too often, stories like this one don't end with someone stepping in. Too often, the cameras capture tragedy instead of change. And too often, society shakes its head, scrolls to the next story, and forgets. But forgetting is a luxury not everyone has. So, the question remains, how many more moments like this will it take before we decide enough is enough? How many more children will be forced to prove their innocence, their humanity, before the world finally sees them as they are? That night, two black children reminded a billionaire, and everyone watching, what true wealth really looks like. Not in bank accounts or credit cards, but in compassion, in courage, in a willingness to do what others won't. And if we're honest, maybe they didn't just save him from embarrassment. Maybe, in a way, they saved us all from forgetting what humanity is supposed to mean. So as you leave the story behind, ask yourself, will you be another silent witness in the crowd? Or will you be the one who steps forward, who speaks up, who chooses to see? Because silence never changed the world. But action, no matter how small, always does.